Hello, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining us. We'll begin the session in a couple of minutes, waiting for a few more participants to join. Please stay with us. Okay, great. Once again, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Inclusive Climate Infrastructure Design Challenge. I'm Balanatidrin Marimuthu, Inclusive Climate Researcher at the Global Disability Innovation Hub. I'm a man in my early 30s and Indian by origin. Today, I'm wearing a yellow shirt and have a stubble. On behalf of GDI Hub, it is my pleasure to be the host and facilitator for this interactive knowledge session. Before we dive deeper into the topic, here is a quick overview of agenda for the next 90 minutes. We will begin with an introduction on GDI Hub and the work we are doing at the intersection of urban infrastructure, climate change, and disability innovation. Following that, we have a short presentation on inclusive climate infrastructure, covering what we mean by it and why it is crucial. We will then move on into the main segment, which will take a challenge format. You may have attended previous webinars from GDI Hub. It will be a little different from what you have experienced in the past. We have identified two thematic challenges for today, one on inclusive energy access, and other one on inclusive urban mobility. For each theme, we have a challenge setter, a person with disability who has offered to share their lived experiences, the context-based barriers, and reflections on how to solve them. Followed by that, we have three professionals joining us from inclusive design, climate action, and urban design experience, who will collaboratively respond to the post-challenge towards a solutions-oriented discussion. We also encourage the audience to share their thoughts using the chat box. And if you may have any questions, drop them in the Q&A box, which we will pick up in the end. At the GDI Hub, this is the first time we are exploring such a format, and we are super excited about how this session is going to unfold. The key highlight is even the speakers, the panelists are going to hear about the challenges for the first time with you all today live in the session. We hope you all will stay with us throughout the 90 minutes and have an engaging experience. Finally, the audience also have an opportunity, as I mentioned, to raise your questions. So please remember to raise your questions as and when through the session in the Q&A box, which will be picked up at the very end. I would like to highlight that we also have live captioning available for the session, and this session is being recorded and will be made available in GDI Hub's YouTube channel in the future. For anyone who is joining GDI Hub's event for the first time, the Global Disability Innovation Hub is both an academic research center and a community interest company hosted by the University College London. With disability innovation as our anchor, we work across sectors, including gender, finance, etc., to accelerate ideas into impact for a more just world for disabled people and all people. GDI Hub also delivers the UK International Development Funded flagship program called the Assistive Technology 2030, which tests what works to improve access to assistive technology for all. Under the 80-20-30, we also run multiple subprograms, and specifically for today's session, two of them are relevant. First one, we have an inclusive infrastructure subprogram, as we recognize that access to and uninterrupted usage of assistive technology requires an inclusive and accessible built environment. We also have a climate resilience subprogram, as we believe that disability innovation and inclusive design can offer valuable lessons for creating climate solutions. So what we have done so far. Through the last 4 years, with local partnerships, we have built a global picture on inclusive infrastructure by particularly studying and documenting 6 case studies from low and middle income countries. As you see in the map here, these include Medellin from Colombia, Freetown from Sierra Leone, Nairobi from Kenya, Varanasi from India, Solo from Indonesia, and finally Ulaanbaatar from Mongolia. Drawing on insights from these studies, we published a global comparison report and a global action report at the World Urban Forum last year. We are also delighted to share that we are now have begun work to our first inclusive city pilot at Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. You will hear more about it in the coming months. We also have a request and a call to action at the end of the session for you all. So what is this global action report? It is a practical guidance document to equip cities and city practitioners in prioritizing actions for embedding accessibility and inclusive design across physical infrastructure and services in a city. The report defines the idea of inclusive city from multiple dimensions and lists 10 principles and 16 action areas backed by case studies and evidence from our research. You can also scan the QR code on this slide to access the report and other related publications. And all our case studies and our reports are available in our 80/20/30 website, as well as in GDA Hub website, which you can read through. So building on this foundational inclusive infrastructure work, during this year's London Climate Action Week, we hosted an in-person day-long roundtable with over 30 contributors. Through this session, we explored the intersection of disability inclusion, urban infrastructure, assistive technology, and climate crisis. While this was part of a larger research project and a new publication is underway, I would like to highlight 3 key messages that emerged from this engagement. Firstly, embracing lived experience and local knowledge is key to developing solutions which are both user-relevant and climate resilient. Second, co-creating inclusive solutions can not only transform the lives and livelihoods of people with disabilities, but also the larger urban systems and societies. And finally, it is crucial that we nurture a needs-based inclusive innovation ecosystem to avoid disability dongles that are rooted in ableism. So through today's session, which is happening as part of the New York Climate Week, we hope to transcend and operationalize these 3 key messages that we got from the London Climate Action Week. As I mentioned, the 2 challenge setters joining us from Kenya and Mongolia will share their lived experiences and local knowledge. Followed by that, we have 3 panelists who will steer the solutions-oriented discussion. And finally, together, with all your input and engagement, we hope this session will reinforce the need for inclusive climate infrastructure and innovation. So that's all from me for now. I invite my colleague Aname to present on inclusive climate infrastructure and set the context for this session. Over to you, Aname.
Hello, thank you, Bala. So my name is Aname Muldowney. I am a white Irish female in my early 30s, and I'm wearing a green dress and have long brown hair. I'm an inclusive design researcher at the GDI Hub, and today I want to introduce what inclusive climate infrastructure is to us and why it's important that we're talking about it today in this session. So next slide. So as I said, let's start by clarifying what we mean by inclusive climate infrastructure. So it is infrastructure, both physical and service-led, for climate adaptation and resilience, such as energy, transport, or green or blue systems. It is planned, designed, and managed for equal access, use, and benefit of all people, including persons with disabilities. It integrates inclusive design from the onset, anticipating diverse requirements, and is co-created with people with disabilities and other marginalized groups. Some examples might include floodable or sponge parks with step-free pathways, tactile wayfinding, or accessible shelters. It might include heat-resilient public spaces that may have shaded, accessible seating or cooling centres with clear signage. Or it may include inclusive transport hubs that are designed with people with disabilities to ensure everybody can evacuate safely during a crisis. Some other examples are inclusive climate communication channels to ensure that everybody is able to reach those channels and has that knowledge in an accessible way. And also inclusive employment in the management of climate resilient infrastructure maintenance. Next slide. So the global picture on climate change and disability. Well, globally, 1.3 billion people live with a disability. And 80% of those people, that's about 1 million people, live in low or middle income countries. And roughly half of those live in cities. Meanwhile, cities produce about 70% of global emissions and are highly exposed to climate risks, such as heat waves, flooding, and storms. If we take this example of Bangladesh as an example, 1/4 of the population in Bangladesh has a disability, and yet the country ranks 7th globally for climate vulnerability. So looking at that, the very places where the majority of people with disabilities are living are also the places most at risk from climate change. Next slide. So why are these impacts so disproportionate for people with disabilities? When we look at cities in general, we find that people, all people, around 50% of those are living in cities. But yet climate change is really intense for people with disabilities. As climate change intensifies extreme weather events, disproportionate impacts on people with disabilities happen for many reasons. These reasons can be such examples as are listed here. So injuries and disaster risk. So persons with disabilities are twice as likely to be injured during disasters. There are health risks with power cuts that can interrupt healthcare and assistive technology. And disrupted access routes can also delay medication or healthcare. There's also the fact that many people with disabilities, due to economic barriers and exclusion, find that they live in informal settlements or periphery areas which are more vulnerable to shocks and are slower to recover. And once again, also the lack of inclusive communication. So without inclusive planning in our communication, our warnings, we worry that we might not reach people and might leave people without information or support that they need during crises. Next slide. So then looking at the evidence from GDI Hub's Inclusive Cities research. As Bala mentioned, our research looked across 6 different cities: Ulaanbaatar, Varanasi, Surakarta, Nairobi, Freetown, and Medellin. And in this research across 6 cities, it confirmed these challenges. Residents told us many things, and two of these quotes are shown here on the left. So the first one from a resident in Freetown, Sierra Leone said, "Persons with disabilities are normally excluded when responding to disasters in slum communities. And in actual sense, they are most vulnerable and most affected persons that need serious attention. Therefore, a lot needs to be done to minimize the exclusion of persons with disabilities in times of disasters, because many of them were unable to access relief items in disaster response." And then the second quote says, from a resident in Nairobi, Kenya, "The drainage and sewerage systems are blocked during the rainy seasons and flows over to the houses, which is a health and mobility risk." So as I mentioned, all 6 cities, they faced different climate-related problems. Yet in a review that we did of 354 infrastructure projects worldwide that claimed to be disability inclusive, less than 1% of them addressed climate resilience. So the key takeaway from that is that inclusion is key to resilience, and we cannot create sustainable, future-proof cities if they are not inclusive. Next slide. So before we move into our design challenge, I wanted to leave you all with a call for action, both to start the challenge and then I'll have another one at the end. But to start the challenge, I wanted to say that it's clear, as I said, that inclusive design is critical to not only safe, future-proof cities for everybody, but also to achieving UN Sustainability Development Goals, especially SDG 11 on sustainable cities. Yet far too many climate and infrastructure projects, as mentioned in the research we did, still overlook people with disabilities. So this session aims to amplify less heard voices and to explore how we can co-create solutions that make cities livable and equitable. So the real call to action, I might say, is to listen carefully to the lived experiences, voices that you're about to hear, and to bring those insights from those people into tangible ideas and share with us ways that we can begin to address the problems at hand. Now I'll pass you back over to my colleague, Bala.
Thank you, Rene. Thanks a lot for giving us a global picture on the importance of inclusive climate infrastructure. So with that background, it is now my pleasure to introduce our panelists for today, who will be joining us across both the challenges. Our first panelist is Asma Jinnah. Asma is Senior Advisor, Urban Climate Finance and Inclusive Action to the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, Global Secretariat, where she oversees the delivery of the Invest for Cities pillar. This seeks to increase the flow of public and private sector investment in support of urban climate change mitigation and resilience projects. Asma previously led the Gender, Disability and Inclusion portfolio, amongst others, for the Infrastructure and Cities for Economic Development Facility, and was Associate Director, Europe, Middle East and Africa for the Rockefeller Foundation's 100 Resilient Cities program. Most recently, Asma led the Gender, Equitable and Inclusive Climate Action Planning Toolkit, a resource designed to equip cities with practical guidance for integrating equity and inclusion into their climate action planning. Welcome, Asma. Thanks a lot for joining us. Next, we are joined by Shirley Steber. Shirley is a design consultant at KDI and a landscape architect with over 8 years experience in developing people-centered, safe and climate-resilient public spaces and transport systems in Nairobi. At KDI, Shirley co-develops inclusive design strategies for projects in Kibera, City Carton, and Turkana with a focus on equity and the inclusion of marginalized voices, including persons with disabilities, in the design and regeneration of public spaces. Most recently, she played a vital coordination role in the Nairobi Urban Fabric Initiative project, a community-led program that implements small-scale public space projects co-designed with citizens, civil society, and government, while ensuring that the needs of all stakeholders, including people with disabilities, are included in Nairobi's informal settlements. Thanks for joining us, Shirley. Welcome. And finally, we have Mekela Patrick also joining this panel. Mekela is the head of research and delivery at GDA Hub. In this role, Mekela works at the intersection of inclusion, sustainability, and climate change, particularly focusing on inclusive and resilient cities. Mekela is also the research lead on the 80-20-30 Inclusive Infrastructure Subprogram. As a trained architect, prior to joining GDA Hub, Mekela worked as a research associate at the Helen Hamlin Center for Design, looking at the process of designing and constructing buildings for late-life care and with STEMA Health on community-led solutions to improving health in low-resource settings. Mekela also has experience working in architectural practices in Spain and China with field work on global health around the world, such as maternal health in rural Kenya and adolescent mental health in urban South Africa. Thanks to all three of you for joining us today. Before we actually start a discussion with you, we actually will be listening to lived experience. So I'll jump onto the first challenge and then we'll connect back with you. With no further delay, let's get into the challenge one on inclusive energy access. Energy access as a theme directly links to the Sustainable Development Goal 7, which highlights the importance of affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy. Particularly, we have target of universal energy access by 2030, by which will be measured by the reliance on clean fuels and technology by all, including people with disabilities. Recent research shows that people with disabilities have comparatively higher energy needs for both accessibility as well as for the use of assistive technology. From an everyday life perspective, energy is foundational for well-being and hygiene, cooking, personal mobility and transportation, critical life support, and communication. A recent white paper prepared by the GDA Hub for the Transforming Energy Access platform argued that in the context of climate change, where the heating and cooling needs are exponentially increasing, disability can be a cause and consequence of energy poverty, as households of people with disabilities have higher energy needs but lower economic means to meet them. From this larger background, we will now hear from Tamir from Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, on the lived experiences around energy access. Over to you, Tamir.
Hello, thank you, Mr. Bala, and I'm very happy to share my experience and also to share my findings, which is found from the study under the 80-20-30 program. Okay, my name is Tamirko Narangirl, and I'm 41 years old. And 10 years ago, in 2015, I got a spinal cord injury on my neck, and since then my both hands and both legs are paralyzed. And now I am working at the Universal Progress Independent Living Center since 2019, and I live in Ulaanbaatar. Ulaanbaatar is the capital city of the Mongolia, which is counted as the coldest capital city in the world. Of course, there is a lot of colder cities, but for the capital city, which is Ulaanbaatar is one of the coldest city, and the Ulaanbaatar temperature has varies from the minus 28 to plus 25 degrees around the summer, no, around the year, and when it get more colder. It reaches below than minus 30 degree, and when it gets hotter in summer time, the Ulaanbaatar temperature increases upper than 30 degrees Celsius. The, the coldest days continues around 20 to 35 days, and which is the making some more risks for the people with disabilities. For my daily life, uh, I use the electric wheelchair and electric patient bed and notebook for my work. And for the home application, I use the home heating system, centralized from the city, and uh, electric oven and personal car for the transportation and other some family devices which is using the electric power. The barriers for the access to the heating system energy is that Ulaanbaatar, for myself, like in Mongolia, that sometimes we have electric power shortage, and when I go out or when I stay home, uh, it limits my mobility. Like when I staying at home, if the electric power is shuts down, I will I'm not able to go out. When I going out outside for the work or something, and when that time if the electric is shutting down, I can't get home. So that's the one of the uh, challenge I am facing here, and also the for other people with living in Ulaanbaatar city with disabilities are that facing other some barriers. For example, the heating system of the Ulaanbaatar is s- uh, doesn't reach doesn't access to everyone in Ulaanbaatar. Ulaanbaatar has a 1.6 million population, but around half of them are living in Gir district, which is the rural area, and those rural areas are not connected to the central heating system, and that's why the people are living in Gir district are making fire at home for the provide their heating, and also the making fire is that creating some hazard for people with disabilities like air pollution, indoor and outdoor air pollution, also the risk of the firing at home, home firing. The financially the uh, from for myself it's like my wheelchair, bed, and notebook, and etc. That those items are costs over 2,000 USD, but my monthly welfare allowance is like around 3 or 400 USD. So which is much difficult to provide my needs, and so that's the uh, one big challenge for people with disabilities. Not only for me, other people with disabilities also having such a problems. And for my recommendation that uh, if the Ulaanbaatar city has a full of the access of the heating system, at least the heating system, which is reducing the risk of the configuration risks because uh, people with disabilities such as uh, visual disability or people with cerebral palsy are very difficult to make a fire at home, and also the I know that some of our friend who has cerebral palsy and lost their life when they're making fire at home. So that's the one of the biggest risk for the people with disabilities related to the energy in Ulaanbaatar city. Okay, I think that's the things that I need to cover things.
Thank you
Thank
so
you very
much,
much.
Tamir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing that with us. You have made it very clear how challenging are the weather conditions locally and how that impacts energy needs for people with disabilities, particularly. And also, thanks for highlighting the linkage between access to assistive technology and access to energy, as often those perspectives are not covered under energy transition programs and policies. So, with this background, I now invite our panelists to join us and share their opening responses and what they think could be the solutions or the way forward towards the solutions on this. Asma, Michaela, and Shirley, I would really appreciate it if you can turn on your cameras and also be prepared for your first responses. Michaela, I see you. Maybe you can start as well. Would you like to maybe share the first response in 2 minutes on whatever your reflections are with Tammy's lived experience?
Sure. Hi everyone, my name is Michaela Patrick. Bala already introduced me, so I won't repeat. It's a pleasure to be here, and I firstly just wanted to say thank you so much to Tamir for sharing his experiences in Ulaanbaatar. I think really his insights really highlight what my main point I want to make is starting off, which is the vital importance of co-creating solutions and understanding that across the climate space, whatever sector area we're trying to work in, we need to be co-creating solutions with the people that are likely experiencing the most exclusion, such as people with disabilities. And I think Tamir's kind of challenge or his insights really show the importance of that. You know, Bala picked up on the fact that he brought up the issue of AT access being something really critical to enable people with disabilities to have autonomy and independence. However, it's not something that's often covered in energy policies. And in fact, energy and assistive technology are two areas that are most likely in every city or government going to be covered by completely different ministries. So how do we link those two things up to make sure that we have a real, inclusive and comprehensive approach to inclusive energy access, which is not just about the provision of power, but it's thinking about how people living in those cities, those places need to use that power to kind of enable their everyday lives. I think I'll probably stop there for now and pass over to our other panelists to share their initial reflections, and then maybe I'll chip in again. But yeah, co-creating solutions is my main message.
Thanks, Michaela. Asma, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Great to be here today. And thank you from me as well for sharing your lived experience. It's just incredible insight. And as Michaela has said, I would also focus on the sort of participatory. So my perspective would come from a municipality or a local government and the role that they can play in terms of ensuring that persons with disabilities are included in the participatory planning processes. So co-creating those solutions together, looking at the data that shows you kind of what the needs are across the urban, the municipality, and then working with energy service providers to ensure that you've got business continuity, disaster risk reduction plans in place. As was mentioned, what's at risk, the hazards are around flooding, fires, lack of energy to power wheelchairs and other key the key equipment. And I think there's a real role there for the local government can play in making sure that they or that private sector partners as energy providers are really thinking about business continuity and disaster risk reduction and how they can mitigate some of those for persons with disabilities. I think that's probably where I would focus. I think there's also something around, you also mentioned something around budgeting, May to September being kind of key areas when you've got high energy use. And I think there's something there about making sure that, accessibility is embedded with service providers in terms of ensuring that tariffs, energy bills, etc., are accessible, are very transparent, to really help manage some of that budgeting as well. So I come from the Global Commission of Mayors for Climate and Energy, so really thinking about the role that mayors and local authorities can play for their citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Asma. Over to you, Shirley.
Thank you very much. I think also mine is to just appreciate Amir for the shared experience. And my reflections will be around from a design perspective. So from my experience is that it's just not about the energy product, because from Tamir's experience, the energy products that he requires are actually there, but actually making them accessible or making the spaces around the energy products accessible and usable for everyone is the challenge. So I would say that from a design and landscape architecture perspective, co-design means that co-design ensures that everyone is involved when planning for these energy products or where these energy products will be located, so that it's embedded from the onset, so that they are not much of an afterthought. So in KDI, we've seen how participatory mapping and on-site workshops with persons with disabilities change the way we locate and even configure community energy infrastructure. And through that, we are able to ensure that everyone is able to access those infrastructure, whether energy products or where you charge your assistive devices. So with that, ensuring that they are usable by everyone. So those are just my initial thoughts, but I'll be able to give more insights as we proceed.
Thank you so much, Shirley. Thanks a lot, all three of you. We have now 15 minutes for a deeper discussion on this. We also have some high-level questions. So I'll bring up maybe one by one, and we can try to take as many comments as you would like. So I'm not necessarily expecting all three panelists to answer all the three questions. So if you'd like to respond, please, maybe you can raise your hand, or you can also just like unmute yourself and start contributing your points as well. My first question, I'm kind of also building from what Asma mentioned. She mentioned about the role of city governments and the larger utility agencies and private sector, the role that they can play in enabling environment itself. Asma, would you like to maybe speak a little more about how we can make sure climate finance reach people with disabilities? Often we see that the actions are very much in a product level. It doesn't really reach the finance perspectives. So would you see any opportunities specifically for city governments to take climate finance from a disability inclusion perspective?
That's a really big question. That's a really big question, Bala. Absolutely. I mean, I think there is a duty, a responsibility on city governments to ensure that. But I think this is where the information and the data point comes in. Once you understand, you know, what needs your citizens have across a number of intersectional kind of personal disabilities or identities. You know, we work a lot with people from Indigenous communities as well, who have specific knowledge and specific needs. So there's something about understanding your citizens and what they need and raising that at the national and the international level around climate action plans, climate action strategies. And unless you raise those issues, it's very hard to allocate budget and climate finance to them. There's also a responsibility in making sure that infrastructure within your cities is usable by the people that want to use it, and therefore you're creating jobs, you're making sure that you're potentially expanding your tax base as well. That would allow you to then provide subsidies to those that might have lower incomes or who are less able to afford some of the solutions that are available. So there's a number of things that city governments can do at the international, national, and then local level as well in terms of raising the visibility of their citizens' needs.
Thanks, Asma. Would it be right for me to say that your point is more centered on the need for data and evidence? The importance of building data and evidence is critical for us to also inform the right policies. Would you say that as the critical core point that you are trying to make?
I would say that there's yes, information and data is important, but that goes hand in hand with the advocacy and diplomacy side of making sure that the voices of persons with disability is heard, as a way of kind of identifying and then co-designing that Michaela kind of talked about.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Shirley.
Thank you, Bala. So I would say that one opportunity is to link climate finance directly to community managed infrastructure or public spaces. And we've seen this work very well with some of our KDI work. So you find that the already existing grassroots organizations are already managing community infrastructure very well. So in our KDI case, they manage toilets that are being used by PWDs very well. They manage other facilities that are being used by PWDs and also the wider community very well. So similar models could also manage energy access nodes and ensuring that funds do not just pass through national treasuries or county governments, but actually reach the communities and specifically PWD projects and even PWD-led organizations, where from our experience, we've seen that they are actually best placed to manage and sustain such projects and actually such funds. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Shirley. Over to you, Vipula.
I'll be super quick. I just wanted to quickly jump in with my researcher hat on, building a bit on Asma's point about kind of data and evidence. And one thing I think from my work at GDI Hub I've seen is that, it's super important that we're co-designing solutions, that we're co-creating evidence with the people experiencing these issues day to day and really understanding the needs. But I think there's also a massive area of kind of research and data needed about the benefits and the incentives that creating more inclusive solutions can bring. Asma touched on it really briefly, like a more inclusive transport system is going to create more jobs because more people will be able to access work. Tamara spoke a lot about how restrictions in energy might mean he might not be able to get out the door one day, or it might mean he might go to work and then get stuck, and that creates a kind of risk that's going to impact people's autonomy. So I think making sure, as a community, we're also, when we're co-designing, when we're creating solutions, we should also be building that evidence on how this works, why it works, and how it really is of benefit to all. And I think and hope, we'll have kind of sustainable and kind of resilient impacts in the broadest sense, also creating more thriving, inclusive economy in the long run.
Thanks, Michaela. So also kind of building from all of the panelists' points right now. So some of our major audience for this session and also the wider action is we have city governments, as Asma mentioned, the need for them to work together. And as Shirley has a design perspective, she also have found how design can play a role here, as well as how projects can be supported with climate finance. And Michaela, you mentioned a lot about co-design as well. So my question is, let's say that our key actors are disability advocates, designers, and city governments. If one of them have to take a first step, what would you really recommend as their first step and what they should be doing in this space to kind of address Tamir's challenge as well as the larger energy access challenge? So any first step for any of the actors that you think are relevant? Anyone can answer this.
Sorry, Shirley, you go.
Thanks, Michaela. Yeah, so well, I would say that the first step would be to actually design with accessibility in mind. So you find that if you design something that benefits persons with disability, it's likely to benefit children, women, everyone in the community. So you find that having barrier-free walkways, well-accessed public spaces, it benefits women with strollers, it benefits older people. And you find that this approach avoids costly fixes later, because now you are not coming in to build in as need arises from other users. But that one of thinking with accessibility in mind actually benefits everyone and ensures that spaces are just. So this double lens, we find that ensures that you put in accessibility and also you put in resilience in mind. So just designing basically with accessibility in mind benefits everyone, and usually it brings in an extra element of resilience also in the process. Thank you.
Thanks, Shirley. What do I want to go for?
Sure. I think my point was similar, is essentially to understand that accessibility should really be non-negotiable in any kind of project design. So whether that's, at the local government level, preparing, a project brief, beginning to look at the procurement process, accessibility, disability inclusion should be baked in from the very beginning of kind of project conception. As a designer, the same thing, at the very beginning of thinking through the process. We need to think about accessibility and disability inclusion in mind, and how we get there. What's going to be the process that's going to ensure that we have that? And that is things like bringing in people with disabilities to be actively involved as active agents in that process, not as kind of passive end recipients of a design solution. So ensuring that it's baked in from the very beginning, but is also consistently considered throughout, and that's going to require kind of a certain enabling environment, including a budget that allows to ensure that it's maintained and not lost throughout what can often be quite a complex design process, particularly when we're talking about large scale infrastructure and so on.
Sure. Asma, do you have anything to add?
I just wanted to build on what both Shirley and Michaela are saying, that it's about good urban design fundamentally. And I love, in the UK, maybe some of you listening in are from the UK. I've seen lots of ads coming up recently about how innovation for persons with disabilities is actually really, really useful. And Shirley gave an example of that with the drop curbs that's used by, people on prams. My little boy uses it for his scooter now. We see people using them on bikes, which is fantastic. But I think the role that the local government can play, GCOM focuses very much on smaller secondary cities, which is where the urban growth is going to happen. So in terms of mitigations, a lot of that infrastructure is yet to be built, particularly when you look at sub-Saharan Africa. A lot of the infrastructure that these smaller secondary cities are going to need with the expansion in population, there's an opportunity now to build that in. And as Michaela said, bake it in from the beginning, but also local authorities are going to be the biggest employers and the biggest procurers often in those smaller cities. So there's an opportunity to have policies in place where you can build it into the whole project lifecycle for infrastructure, from concept through to implementation. But also as the biggest procurer, often you can lead by example and build it into your procurement contracts as well. So it's a really powerful role to be in, particularly in the global south, where you're commissioning infrastructure.
Sure, Asma. I'm also conscious of time. We have just a couple of minutes to close this segment. My last question, again, common to all three panelists, is would you like to highlight any case studies or resources that you think would be particularly useful for the audience in this area? Like any best practices that we can learn from, that you know of from your work or from other colleagues' work?
Well, if I can jump in, I'm very happy to share.
Please.
I'm very happy to share that GCOM launched in July with the support of our board mayor, Carolina Basualdo, in Argentina, gender equity and inclusive climate action planning. So that's 9 steps that we set out in terms of climate action planning, which includes focuses on gender, but of course includes persons with disabilities, indigenous communities, migrants, and looks at intersectionality as well. And it has a dozen or so case studies from around the world, mostly global south, that looks at good practice across inclusivity, but it also lists in our resources section there's a couple of pages of resources. So I would definitely go and look at that resources page, and there are disability specific resources as well that are linked to there. So I really hope that you can go and look that up. I'm sure somebody will post the link in the chat somewhere.
Yeah, very much. Michaela, Shirley, do you have any case studies to highlight?
Sure. And so someone asked in the Q&A about the intersection of AT and solar, and I actually replied in text just for speed. But there are examples of this, such as using solar powered hearing aids, which supports AT use in off-grid settings, which is something really critical to ensure that people can maintain AT use. I think there's so much more potential to be explored in this area. Not so many innovations at the intersection of this, but it's something we're actively interested in and working towards. And I think for anyone that wants to know a bit more about the intersection, we at GDI Hub have been working with the Carbon Trust for the Transforming Energy Access Programme on this very topic, looking at how to embed disability inclusion in energy access. And we have a report on the opportunities, which includes more case studies for anyone that's interested to know more. Again, I think we can find the link and pop that one in the chat, because I think that's a good overview from the kind of nascent research that we've done in this space.
Thanks, Nikinda. Shirley, any case studies from a design perspective?
Yes, thanks, Bala. Maybe if I mention one by one, I think we could be here the whole day, but just to draw your attention to one of our frameworks that really summarizes the learnings that we've gathered over the years on infrastructure, especially not only for PWDs but for all stakeholders. So we have a framework called 3IF. That's the Integrated and Inclusive Infrastructure Framework for informal settlements, because in KDI we do recognize that informal settlements are a strong part of the urban fabric, which really creates opportunities to embed inclusive energy, inclusive access at scale. So I think that's something that I would really recommend for everyone to check out. It has a lot of tactics there that talks about streets, how to design streets, how to design public spaces for not only persons with disability, but for all stakeholders. So I think that really, I would point everyone to that framework that really really draws lessons from our 20+ years of work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cindy. I think with this, we kind of can close this challenge part. Thank you so much, Tommy, once again. We know that it's too late for you in the evening. Thanks for staying all up for us. We appreciate your time and contribution. I now hand over to Aname to carry out the next challenge segment.
Okay, thank you very much. It was very nice to hear the recommendation and comments from the all of you, and I'm happy. And thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you, Tommy.
Bala, if you wouldn't mind just showing the slides again. That was a really great session, and I think it's a great thing to build on to into our next challenge. So our next challenge is inclusive urban mobility. And if we can go on to the next slide. So to talk about inclusive urban mobility, I come back to SDG 11. So making cities and urban settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. So target 11.2 says that by 2030, we must provide access to safe, affordable, accessible, and sustainable transport systems for all, with special attention to the needs of women, children, persons with disabilities, and older persons. And in our Global Action Report, inclusive mobility is one of the 16 action areas. So the research says that low emission zones should consider diverse mobility needs and not penalize persons with disabilities. They also say that micro mobility and e-mobility solutions should be developed in consultation with persons with disability. And drawing from our case study, inclusive design and accessibility of the built environment in Nairobi, Kenya, our research says assistive technology devices can help persons with disabilities navigate public transport options. However, things like traffic congestion, unpredictable routes, crowding, and the use of informal stops limit their effectiveness. So now to speak to this, I'm going to go to the next slide. And I'm going to introduce you to our speaker today, which is Herman Lahanda, who comes from Korokocho in Nairobi, Kenya, who's going to speak to us about his community and his involvement, his engagement with inclusive urban mobility and mobility within his community. Hello, Herman.
Yeah, hello. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. My name is Herman Lianda. I'm from Nairobi, Kenya. I live in Korogocho slum, second largest slum in Kenya, and I have physical disability. Has given me a deep understanding of daily needs of person with disability. This is why I started my organization called Gione Group for Developing People with Disability. And our mission is just simple: to make sure that people with disability feel encouraged, empowered, and their rights are protected. We want to help everyone reach their full potential. Last year, in November, I led my team in climate change advocacy work. We ended the work by planting tree and make it grow in our community. The goal was to remind everyone to take care of the environment, especially after being flood we experienced last year and the last year but one. Nairobi has a special kind of weather. We have two rainy seasons, what we call the short rains in November and December, and the long rain from March to May. The rest of the time it's hot. The climate can be dangerous for person with disability. My home in Korogocho slum is located close to the Nairobi largest dump yard, which makes the problem even worse. During the rain, our streets get flooded and become muddy. Rivers and it's impossible to get around. During the hot season, the heat is so intense, it can cause dehydration and exhaustion, making even a shorter journey difficult. For me, getting around every day is a constant challenge. I rely on my caregiver for my personal mobility, and my entire schedule revolves around his time and availability. I use motorbike, taxi, and matatu, but the journey is never easy. Taxi would be a good option, but they are very expensive. Infrastructure in Nairobi makes everything harder. The roads are full of potholes. There are no proper sidewalks, and the drainage system are broken. On rain days, the streets are flooded and slippery. And there are often limited shelters at bus stop. On very hot days, the heat and overcrowded on vehicle are a big problem. Using public transport has so many challenges. First, the design of vehicles, matatu, public transport are not disability friendly. They have steep steps, and no ramps. It is impossible for me to get on without someone lifting me. They are often overcrowded and have no assistance for people with disability. Second, the cost is bigger barrier. Fare can rise during bad weather or when fuel price.
Hello, Herman. I think we may have lost your sound.
That connectivity also, yeah. Okay.
It's okay. You're back.
Always
clearly.
Yeah. Are you getting me?
Yeah, we can hear you clearly now. Thanks, Herman.
Okay. Sorry. I'll continue. I was saying that not all neighborhoods are linked, and we always face the last miles challenge of getting from bus stop to our home. Shared mobility services are also not always friendly. On top of that, there are poor schedules and unreliable services which cause delay and frustrations. I had to come up with my own ways to manage the delay challenge. The most important one is the relationship I have with my caregiver. He is the one who helps me get around and even circle with me for short distance. I have also learned to adjust my travel time, leaving early or late to avoid peak traffic. And where possible, I use digital apps to help me plan my routes and find the best way to get where I need to go. These are the biggest solution, but they are practically adjustments that help me navigate my world. Thank you for the time. And I have some questions. I don't know if I can ask.
Yes, Herman, feel free to go ahead.
Okay. I'm here to learn from the expertise in design city planning and climate action. Here are some of my that I come from my daily life. The first one is, what are some simple, affordable things that can be done to exit public transport vehicle like matatu to make them easier for people with disability to use? Second, how can a city planner help us with the last miles problem, the struggle to get from the main road or bus stop to our home, especially in place like Korogocho? The third one, how can community like mine are most affected by climate issues be included in the planning process that ensure that solution for climate resilience also address our specific mobility needs? Thank you for the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Herman, for such an insight into your community and into your life. You brought up some very interesting points, and I think those points you yourself have brought up some questions. What I would think was particularly interesting there, and which I would like to hear the response of our panel today, is around community and how Herman spoke about community and about first to last mile kind of transport and systems, and that idea of kind of systems design, and how it's not only, you know, the infrastructure, it's not only the devices or the transport we have, but it's all those things knitted together, and how we can work with communities. And as Herman asked, how can we make sure that the right voices, Herman mentioned deep understanding, and I think that deep understanding and that understanding of context that Herman brought to us today is something that's really important for us to bring into this systems design. And I'd really like to hear from our panelists more on that. So I don't know who would like to perhaps start with some reflection.
I can start.
Thank you, Shirley.
First, to just thank Herman for his shared experience. I like the fact that you've shared from the lens of a resident, but also like an advocate for persons with disability. So you have like this all-rounded perspective from not only yourself, but also from others. I'd like to respond to your question on how you can be involved. And just to say that I think cities need to, institutionalize co-design so that in every project, whether by civil society, government, PWDs are involved in actual, co-design of, these public spaces. So just to give an example, in our work in KDI, we use in our co-design workshops, we usually engage PWDs in various ways. For example, even in transit walks, let's say if we're designing a street, we have transit walks with persons with disability. We use things like site models, maps, so various ways that can really work for the people that we are engaging, and identifying some of those real barriers in real life. So you find that by using experimental methods in master planning or in planning for public spaces, you're able to identify some of those things that may not show up in drawings. So actually going to the ground there are things that will actually come up that you are not able to identify, or they can't come when you're only working on drawings. So you find that you're able to experiment, you're able to, ground your decision making on lived experience and just not technical guidelines that are usually, in our usual set standards. So I think co-design really plays a very key role in ensuring that people like Haman are involved and considerations are actually put in practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. I see Michaela has her mic off and no doubt has a response to that.
Well, firstly, thank you, Herman, for sharing your experience and also your three kind of questions back to us, which, to be honest, I think, speaking as the sort of inclusive design hat on the panel, I think your questions illustrate exactly one of the things we're quite passionate about at GDI Hub, which is advocacy and education around inclusive design and what it is, because people may hear inclusive design and think accessibility, think a set of technical standards, as Shirley mentioned, that may be applied to a transport system. That is a part of it, but it really is only a small part of it if we're going to achieve the kind of inclusive future that I think we all want, because it's actually a systems problem, and it's something that should be applied across the way we're shaping and designing our world. So I think the 3 points that Herman made illustrate that. So the matatu is, essentially a small bus that needs to be accessible, needs to have ways for people with different disabilities, people using different types of assistive technology, to be able to use that bus. And that's going to involve physical design. It's going to involve service design in terms of working with the drivers to ensure that they're supportive of that. It's also going to involve, a social aspect of, creating awareness and an inclusive culture to ensure that other passengers are also supportive of facilitating that process. But then Herman also mentioned, reaching the community, the last mile transport. There we need to be stepping back and looking at the city scale, at how we're planning our infrastructure needs, at how people are moving through the city, to make sure that a transport system is designed to kind of enable people to get door to door. And often that requires more than one solution. That's going to require the collaboration of multiple agencies or actors, design agencies and so on. And that can be really complex and needs a kind of leadership and culture that's going to prioritize making sure inclusion is embedded. And then lastly, speaking to the community and making sure that we take a people first approach is again really vital, and actually again requires a kind of a leadership and a business as usual, and that requires a huge complex set of things to be in place, funding, willingness, tools and resources and so on. The kind of design tools Shirley mentioned are a great example of how you can capture data and things, and we need more of that, and we need to be sharing how that works and how it creates better solutions. That's not all of it, but these are all part of what we at GDI Hub consider inclusive design. We really need to be thinking about that big picture across systems with people, and really kind of embedding inclusive design in everything that we do.
Absolutely. And I think it needs to come from perhaps both sides as we move from the kind of grass up side to also from the kind of top down. And perhaps with that, Asma, I may ask if you have any reflections.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Herman, again for sharing your experience. Nairobi is one of my favorite cities, actually, so I'm quite envious that you, despite the challenges that you have getting around, get to live there. There's real opportunity to improve quality of life from the way that you've shared your experience. I think there's something also about informality. So the solution, these small buses are themselves innovation by the private sector, where the public sector hasn't been able to provide a solution in real time, right? So there's something about innovation there, small scale innovation, that perhaps can also be expanded to include people with disabilities or other needs, too. And I think there's something there in terms of, recognizing the dialogue between informality and formality, as it were, to try and again look at sort of co-creating solutions, and then, as Michaela was saying, then kind of taking a step back and looking at it at a city scale and looking at what your data tells you about where and how and when people are moving and the needs that they have, and then building in that last mile connectivity. But in a city like Nairobi, I spend a lot of time in Mumbai, in a city like Mumbai, where there is a lot of development, but it's still not meeting the pace at which people require it. I was listening to a comedian actually only a couple of nights ago, where he was saying that on a particular station on a platform 4, there was a bench reserved only for persons with disabilities, except there was no accessible way for persons with disability to get physically to that platform 4, because it was just steps, there were no lifts, right? So some of this is quite disjointed and needs to be looked at a city level, but it's also through, again, procurement, because if you're procuring a number of contractors to deliver certain things that aren't integrated, there's an opportunity there again to kind of have that co-creation, but work at the vertical level, bringing all your various departments and all your various service providers together. Often we talk about multi-level governance being sort of local, sub-regional, national, and then international. And yes, there is vertical alignment, but there's also something about horizontal alignment at the city scale that needs to look at that integration.
Thank you, Asma. What I might add to that, which will bring up a question for the panelists, and once again, anybody can come in on this, even Herman as well, if you would like to reflect further on what our panelists have been discussing, is around a question that Herman asked around low cost, or what I might say is like intermediate solutions. So as we mentioned, and as Asma just said, like Nairobi is a very vibrant city and a very innovative city. And as we know with city governments and with funding, it's not always easy to come up with a big solution that can solve everything in a day. But what perhaps are some options for maybe low cost or kind of intermediate solutions that might allow some of those gaps to be bridged in the interim? If anybody has any examples or maybe ways forward.
I'm happy to come in. I don't know if it completely answers the question, as I don't know how low cost we can truly say it is, but at GDI Hub, we've been working with the Frontier Tech Hub on a project exploring urban mobility solutions in Nairobi. What we were looking at there really was this last mile issue, and how we can ensure that individuals, particularly in this case wheelchair users living in informal settlements, could expand their mobility by using a third wheel device, which is an electric motorized device that attaches to the wheelchair to increase mobility. And this project was actually led by Anime, so obviously do feel free to chime in as well. But I think what's interesting there is we're looking at a device that at an individual scale can have a huge impact on someone's day-to-day life, could open up opportunities for employment and so on. But one of the challenges we came up against there was, well, how do we make sure that that's affordable? Because they are, relatively speaking, quite expensive devices. So we was then starting to look at what's the business and innovation model here. Are there organizations we could partner with that could create, some kind of loan scheme or have some kind of incentive that would enable, us to get these devices into the hands of people that need them, and then they'd be able to use them, and then they would gain benefit from that, and then potentially be able to over time afford the device, or there'd be an economic benefit in return to the organization loaning the devices that would mean that wouldn't be needed. And it's these kind of solutions that we need to be thinking about. Just getting the device into someone's hands is only a small part of the picture. They need to be able to afford it. They need to be able to afford the maintenance. They need to be able to charge it. So then we're coming back to inclusive energy access again. And I think for me, that was a really eye-opening project that really zoomed in on quite a micro scale, almost at an individual level, looking at kind of one type of disability, one type of device, and what that could do, and how we could try and improve mobility through that. and all these problems came up, going through to talking about, well, do we need solar power charging stations here? What's the business model? And for me, those points are really interesting and really, worth thinking through. And it's why we need more discussions like this, more kind of design challenge approaches to the way we're talking about these issues, so that we start to understand the complexity of the problems, but also design solutions that will work in the long term. Because sometimes we do see innovations that don't have that kind of more sustainable, resilient element in mind, which can be a bit of a challenge.
Thank you for sharing that, Michaela. And I think that might bring me to a question I might have for Shirley. So as maybe a reflection on that project, which I know Herman is actually involved in and was a participant on that study, is around kind of community-led. So from that piece of work, what we learned a huge amount from the communities, and from bringing those devices and seeing how they could be made affordable or provided in a way that they could be provided to a community, and the community could work together using one device to perhaps empower more people. And I know that KDI does a huge amount of work around communities and innovation, and also community work with climate. And I wonder, how can communities begin to kind of work together, people with disabilities, people without disabilities, to really start to come up with solutions? Like Nairobi is a hugely innovative city, it's really known for that. And what kind of solutions maybe are KDI doing within the communities to kind of solve some of those things?
Thanks, Aname. So I think I'll talk about two things. The first one is in our process. So our process is rooted on co-design and engaging the community from the onset. So that is not only persons with disability, but also the wider community. So in that way, creating an enabling environment for persons with disability to come out and be part of shaping the vision for their spaces. So in that way, find that their needs are represented in the kind of interventions that we implement. But also just to add that that notwithholding, we've also, I think in the way that we also design public spaces, we also provide an enabling environment for persons with disability to be able to either move freely or even access that space or utilize those spaces. So we are not big on assistive devices, but in our public spaces, we ensure that they are barrier-free, shaded, continuous walkways that are friendly to persons with disability, so walkable streets, ensuring that stresses of heat are reduced. We improve drainage. I think Herman really pointed out very well that they are also affected by issues of flooding. So in a lot of our work, we use nature-based solutions to address issues of drainage, and also ensuring that they are able to have that independent mobility without requiring caregivers at all times. So in one of our projects called the Kibera Green Street, we utilized natural, locally available materials. So I think that also ties with Herman's questions on how do we, and your question on how do we ensure that, how do we address person accessibility and, needs of persons with disability in an affordable way. So we use natural, locally available materials in upgrading some of our public spaces. And in this way, even the community themselves are able to even repair these spaces in case they are damaged. So they're not too far-fetched in terms of like materiality. And in that way, they're even able to contribute to the build process. So issues of safety, ensuring that routes are safe and navigable for persons with disability, visual disability, tactile materials. And of course, I know that there's even an opportunity for having visual, ways, not visual, but audio-visual ways of assisting persons with disability even navigate some of those spaces. So just making routes safe, navigable for persons with disability, and especially in informal settlements where we work, where routes are not the usual wide routes, there are narrow alleys. So ensuring that even those narrow alleys are safe for people to navigate, persons with disability to navigate. And this sort of has two lenses. It has a climate resilient lens. So we've sorted out issues of flooding, and it also has that accessibility lens. So I think just basically in a nutshell to say that it's in the way that we design our spaces, but also in the way that we also bring on board persons with disability from the onset in our process. Has really improved how we engage persons with disability. Thank you.
Apologies, I was muted, but thank you, Shirley. I think that was really, really insightful. And what was very interesting from that was this idea of like the life cycle of a project and bringing people in from all stages, from the planning straight to the maintenance and to how that is maintained. Because I think that is something we see at GDI Hub, that sometimes there can be a really excellent plan by a government or by an organization who develops something that's inclusive, but the maintenance of it can sometimes, around awareness and advocacy for that space, can be lacking, that people don't really understand how they should keep that, and it can become uninclusive because of that. And also it's important that the people who maintain them can also be people with disabilities, and we can have full involvement in our communities. And as we're coming up on time on this session, I might just ask Asma, you have such a knowledge around kind of that kind of upper level, or the kind of level of governance, and about how we might to start to maybe learn from some of these smaller interventions or grassroots organizations, and how some of these kind of innovative ideas might be able to be fed into the kind of larger city projects.
Yeah, it's always a challenge because it's so resource intensive. And often the capacities, or is often an issue. What we try and do is encourage, through our mayors, cities to be as kind of broad and inclusive as possible, and pick up innovation. But actually, if you are working on innovative projects, we have a whole program called Innovate for Cities. We also work with CDP, where you can work with your local authority to report kind of projects that are looking for funding and financing. There are projects that can be submitted. I don't know if you might know, but there's a really good case for local governments to work with some of these smaller projects, because, for example, there is the City Climate Finance Gap Fund, which is capitalized at 105 million euros, and that offers technical assistance at no cost to the city for OECD DAC recipient countries, so cities in those recipient countries. And so this is no cost technical assistance, and part of that is a commitment to climate reduction, but also to make sure that you have social and equitable impact in your communities. So I think there's a real financial case to be made there in terms of the smaller scale inclusion, and looking at kind of raising the visibility of those projects, both independently as them projects themselves, but also trying to plug them in to your public institutions, because that's the only way really that they're going to get, without that commitment, they won't be able to get that international support. I don't know if that answers your question, Anna-May, but maybe a little too high level for what you were looking for.
No, absolutely. I think that's a really great answer. And I really like this idea of, people being able to report projects and report innovation to their cities and to their mayors. And I think it's very interesting for governments to work with grassroots organizations. And even if the projects may be small, but perhaps even if they're not working directly on that project, maybe there's a project they can learn from for a much larger scale project, because cities are evolving so quickly now that we don't always have the time to put into that development, but there's so much knowledge that already exists. And I think we can really be, learning from that.
as part of our Innovate for Cities, as part of that, we've just done a hackathon as part of New York Climate Week yesterday. And there were 2 innovative projects that were selected that will receive support from a number of foundations, but as well as researchers. And so, of course, there's a capacity issue, I understand, but where possible, reach out and, raise the visibility of your excellent projects and your innovations and solutions, because there is a real willingness to support inclusive, sustainable infrastructure. And we're looking at solutions that we can scale. And for GCOM particularly, the focus is global South secondary and tertiary cities. So yes, it's easy for London and New York and, to some extent, even Nairobi to do these things. But for some of the smaller ones, that's where our focus really is.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think that's on scaling, innovative solutions. I think that's a good place to leave off this session, but also to open up to questions from our audience. So perhaps if we come back to our slides, but also if there's anybody who has any questions, I know we have some questions in the Q&A, but perhaps if anybody would like to raise their hand, I believe they can.
There's one question in the chat that I'd really like to kind of comment on, which is from Vincent, which is about what are the most effective ways to ensure people with disabilities are directly involved in shaping climate resilient infrastructure policies, not just as beneficiaries and decision makers. And I think for me, this is a really interesting point. And actually, our CEO, Ian McKinnon at GDI Hub often says that if we've done our job well at a certain point in time, our jobs won't be needed anymore, because this is what we're trying to create space for. And I think it speaks to kind of a bit of a concluding point for me, which is that to really make that move from understanding disability inclusion as including people with disabilities as kind of recipients or even co-creators, what we really need to be doing is disrupting the system and ensuring that our education and training programs are allowing people with disabilities to access work across these sectors, particularly the climate sector. We should have urban designers who are people with disabilities. We should have people working in climate policy who are people with disabilities. We should have city leaders who are people with disabilities. And that way, we make inclusion business as usual. And in order to make that happen, we need to ensure that our cities and systems are inclusive, because we need an inclusive transport system so that people can go to school, go to university, go to work, and be able to access employment in those spaces. But if you ask me something I would want to see in 10 years' time, it would be that every organization working on inclusive transport or climate solutions would have a person with disabilities within that team working on the projects to actually deliver them. And of course, that doesn't mean that we're not also doing co-creation and co-design with the specific communities that we're designing with. But I think we need both to ensure that we really make sure that inclusion becomes, the day-to-day way of working.
Thanks, Michaela. And one question I might just turn on that, not necessarily just for you, Michaela, but anybody else on our panel or even Tamir or Herman, is because I know that both Tamir and Herman are quite involved either on a policy side or Herman within your community. And for people with disabilities who aren't already involved in some of these areas, but would really like to be involved and to be these leaders in this area, how can they perhaps start to make that move? Perhaps Shirley as well, from some of your community work, like how can people start to get involved? Is there anything we can also do to make sure that people feel like they can, start to be those leaders?
Thanks, Aname. I think how do we make people begin to feel that they want to be involved? Is of course creating a safe space for them to feel that their voices, their community voices, are actually being included in the design process, at least from a design perspective, and that there's an opportunity for them to provide feedback, for us to give feedback to them, and that whatever they actually propose will actually be implemented. Because I think the challenge here in Nairobi is that, and even with our communities, is that they feel that when they are involved, when they speak out or air out some of their needs and perspectives, they are rarely incorporated. But I think giving them that safe space and the assurance that their opinions are actually going to be incorporated really helps in giving them that incentive in participation. But maybe just to also, for those to just add something, that for those advocating, whether they are persons with disability like Haman, who are actually at the forefront for advocating for inclusion. I think one way of really, helping them to make a case is for them to demonstrate the value add of inclusivity. So you find that here in Nairobi, spaces that are actually inclusive are also, they attract more people. You find that those spaces have better business. Things like accidents and those social issues are actually reduced. So if they're able to make a case that it not only is improving accessibility, but it is also bringing other benefits like improved business, improved footfall, safety, then you find that they're able to actually demonstrate value, that it is not only to ensure that it is in creating a just public realm, but also is good for the economy and also it's good for the environment. Then I think it will be easier even for public actors, government, to be able to, incorporate more of what the community is saying.
Absolutely. And I think that additional investment case and the benefit that we all as cities see, I think is really strong. And perhaps as a final question, what I might ask as well is to Mir and to Herman, who very gratefully gave their kind of views on these both topics today, but you're both have like a really influential influence, I would say, on your communities. And how, I may ask how you began, if either of you would like to share how you did that, or what was kind of your first step to, making change within your city or your community.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Like me, what made me to be part of it when I was young, I was not included in most activity of children because I had a disability. I got an accident when I was young. Then I live as a normal person because those days people in the community were hidden in the houses. But my mom and my dad was just keep me out to cope with the environment and the people around me. My organization, Gione, that Gione means see. The word see means let people see what people with disability can do. And in every meetings that people held, public participation, I attend so that I can talk about people with disability to be given opportunity in the community, even in Kenya, so that I know it's, people with disability, they have fear that when they go to maybe public participation, they can be laughed. But me, I fight for my people who has disability so that they can accept themselves and create opportunity for themselves, and they can be the head, and they can lead the other people. As I said earlier, we had a walk, and that walk, I just influenced people who has no disability also to be part of it so that they can learn about people with disability and how to live with them. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that, Herman. And I think it's to talk, maybe what you talk about there maybe is around changing the narrative about what disability is. And I think that that's really strong and really shows from the work that you've done in your community. So thank you very much for sharing that, Herman. And then with that, I might just ask Bala to share our final slide. Just the next one there, Bala. Maybe perhaps the final one, because I think we've just covered that. So as I mentioned previously, our cities are growing very rapidly, By 2050, 68% of us will live in an urban area. So we must act now and ensure that this rapid growth is inclusive and sustainable by working together. So as we mentioned earlier, we're now started on our first city pilot project. So that's a project that will look at our research, but look really at implementation and a lot of the things that we've been speaking about today about how we really design cities in an inclusive and sustainable way. And as we build tools for that, and we build tools for inclusive climate resilience, we are currently on the lookout for inclusive climate infrastructure projects, because as I mentioned earlier, we can really all learn from each other, whether they're large scale or small scale projects. So if you've been working on or worked on, or have even just seen a really great project that you feel is in the kind of inclusive climate infrastructure space, we'd really love to hear about that and really love to speak to you or speak to the people who've been working on it and see what we can learn from that. So my email is there at the end. It's a.muldowney, MULDOWNEY @ucl.ac.uk. So you can please just email me and share those good examples. But beyond that, I just really, which we can go to the next slide, but perhaps it's just a note of thank you to everybody. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to Herman and to Mir and to Shirley and to Asma. And I'm leaving somebody out, and Michaela, of course. Michaela is part of our GDI Hub team. So sadly, I almost left her out, but a very, very great contribution. And also to my co-host Bala and to the rest of the GDI Hub team. I just thank everybody for joining this session today, and I hope we can continue to work together to make sustainable and inclusive cities. So thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of your day wherever you are.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.